Hey Techno Studs, now that we have our wireless controller set up, let's add an access point to it. So I have a Cisco Wireless Access Point here. It's a 2700 series. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna plug it into one of those ports that we configured on switch 1. It's going to get an IP address, and then it's gonna start looking for a connection to our wireless controller. And it does it a few different ways. It can do it through a layer 3 broadcast to try to find that device, that wireless controller, or it can do a DNS lookup to try to find the name of the wireless controller it's supposed to connect into, or it can use the DHCP option and look at the DHCP option to try to find the IP address that it needs to connect to, or we can statically configure it on here. Now, the way that I like to do my networks, that I've done most of my networks, is through the option method. And I've already shown you how to configure the option on our switch 1, so that's already configured. And the one other thing that I need to do is I need to get onto my I had a problem when I already configured one of these, and I had one problem with the time being off. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna jump on the wireless controller, configure the controller with the proper time, and then I'm gonna go plug in this wireless access point into my switch 1 on one of the ports that I configured, and then it's going to use option 43 to discover the IP address that it needs to connect to, and then connect to that IP address, that wireless controller. It will then go through a process of downloading some software on here, some firmware on here, making sure that the firmware is up to date, and do some auto configuration on this device, and then we should see it pop up in our interface. So let's go ahead and jump on our device and start configuring all of this. As I mentioned, one of the first things I need to do is make sure that the time is set on this device, and I was getting a certificate error because the time was way off. And so I had to make sure that the time was set on this device. Now, we did set up a server on here, an NTP server, which should actually set the time on this device. But the NTP server doesn't have access to the outside world, and so it's probably not handing out the proper time right now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm already on this wireless controller right here. I'm going to click on commands, and then under commands, I'm going to set the time. And then I'll go through the process of setting up this time. As you can see, I've already done this and set it up, and then hit the set date and time button, so that way it actually configures this. And then I also did set the time zone and hit this set time zone. So these two now are configured. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my access point and I am going to plug it into my network down there. Now, a couple things to note about this is I do have a console cable on this access point, and so I can actually plug in the console cable to see it come live when it does come live. I do have a power adapter here that it can plug into this device, but that's actually not what I'm going to use. I'm going to use PoE, or Power over Ethernet. I'm going to use this port right here. It's going to deliver Ethernet as well as power to this device, and it will power on. Now, because I'm plugging this into a 3750, that 3750 switch is capable of providing the power to power this up, so I shouldn't have any problems with powering this up. Once I've plugged in the access point and it gets an IP address, takes a look at option 43 to look at the IP address of the controller. It's going to make a connection, and now my controller sees that access point. So I'm here back in the monitor tab of this, and I can scroll down and I can see that access point that's connected to this device right here. I'm going to click the details of this to take a look further into this access point. So I'll click on details. I can see this access point that's connected, some details of it. For instance, instance, the IP address, the model, the MAC address. I can click this AP name to actually get into it. And now I have some configurations of this access point. So some general configurations within here that I can change on this device, the credentials on this device, the different interfaces that are on the device, both the Ethernet interfaces and also the radio interfaces. So I see that on here. I can check high availability and set up some high availability settings on here. I take a look at if I need some other additional information. We saw some of this information actually already, and then any advanced configuration of this device. So we're not going to get real in depth into what all of these settings are. You certainly don't need to know all of this for the CCNA test, but just as an example, what I would do if I wanted to change this AP, which I do, I'm going to call this HQ-AP, and then I'm going to leave lots of room for lots of APs that I would want to set up in the headquarters. So I'm going to call this HQ-AP001. I'll hit apply, and then it will actually apply to that access point. Gives me a message here. Changing AP name will momentarily disrupt clients connected. I don't have any clients connected at this point in time. So I'm just going to click OK. And then I want to make sure I also hit the save configuration so I don't lose it during a restart of the wireless controller. So I'm going to hit that, and now I've made that change, and it should show up in my monitoring now at this point in time as the proper AP. So that's just an example of how to change some of the settings. I now have an access point that I can connect to, and then I can jump on this and start doing some other configurations up here. So there we go. We get a message, successfully saved all configurations. Okay, great. So there you have it. So there is how to add an access point to this wireless controller.